Welcome back here to the show. Hope you're enjoying this holiday weekend. Larry, Mike, and Brad here. Joined by, for the first time on the show, Eric Hansen. He's a publisher and columnist for Inside Indie Sports as part of the Rivals Network. Want to talk a little Notre Dame, football and otherwise. Eric, welcome to the show. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Let's talk football first. The Irish, with what coach has done there, really back among. I don't know if Notre Dame's ever not in the national spotlight, but certainly back among the hierarchy of the elite of college football. I think you could say that. How's this year looking here in 2024?
I think people are pretty excited about it based on kind of how last year finished up for them, even with, a 10-3 season. It felt like Notre Dame was close to making a move to a higher level. And then they did a lot of things in the offseason that put them in a position to possibly do that. I think the most important one was going out and getting an elite offensive coordinator in Mike Denbrock from LSU. He's been at Notre Dame a couple times before in different capacities. He presided over the number one scoring and total offense in college football last year under Brian Kelly at LSU. And then Notre Dame did very well with recruiting and very well in the transfer portal, including but not limited to Riley Leonard at quarterback. They filled some holes at different positions, including safety and nickel that, maybe don't grab the headlines as much, but they've got some really good players. They've got question marks, but this is a Notre Dame team that I think the floor of expectations is making the playoff.
Mhm.
The quarterback position, how is that looking? As that's obviously the big money position in football at every level. How have they been looking there, and what is your prognosis for how things are going to go this season?
I think the one thing that held Brian Kelly back from getting to that next level, and they played for a national championship in 12 and they made the playoff twice and got pushed off the stage pretty hard, was quarterback play. They did not have that elite missing link kind of quarterback, and the quarterback recruiting and development was very inconsistent. They got some big time guys like Gunnar Kiel and Brandon Wimbush, Phil Jakovic, and they didn't develop at Notre Dame. Suddenly, they've been able to start stacking quarterbacks. They have Riley Leonard. They have a kid named Steve Angeli who was started for them in the Sun Bowl, put up the highest pass efficiency rating for a Notre Dame quarterback in a debut in 50 years in that game. They have also some younger quarterbacks that are real exciting. Kenny Minchie, who was a freshman last year, CJ Carr, the grandson of former Michigan coach Lloyd Carr, is a real talent. I think he's going to be the next starter after CJ. Then they got a kid out of Mississippi that's committed in the 25 class named Deuce Knight, 6'4" kid, dual threat, who's probably going to end up a 5-star. And they have another kid stacked behind them in the 26 class, and Noah Grubbs, another high 4-star guy, this time from Florida. So that's where the importance of Mike Denbrock coming in, I think, marries these two concepts. Last year, they had a really nice guy in Jared Parker who kind of defaulted into the offensive coordinator position. He's now the head coach at Troy. I think he's a good football coach. He was not an experienced offensive coordinator, and that showed up in Notre Dame's big games. So, but Ryan Leonard has to be better than he was at Duke. He has to be healthier than he is at Duke, and that's really one of the big storylines this fall.
Yeah, no question at all. Talking once again with Eric Hansen of Inside Indie Sports here on Big Sports Radio. One of the things we always talk about, we've not talked about yet with you, is, of course, the constant change in the landscape of college athletics. Notre Dame is still the number one piece on the board, holding on to independence in football. But obviously, we know there's so much money involved, pressure, obviously, to stay in the ACC. The Big Ten the door is always open, even if it's locked. I think they will give them a key to come on inside to join. What's the latest right now with Notre Dame with July here and the Big Ten now 18 teams, SEC 16 teams? Is there any movement at all, do you think, to maybe joining a conference?
I don't think there is. And here's why. The formula is really simple with Notre Dame in terms of what would push them to really, really look at leaving football independence. Number one is, especially now with these big numbers that the SEC and the Big Ten are putting up with their media rights deal, a media rights deal. And Notre Dame just recently re-upped with NBC with a huge spike in payout. I talked with Pete Bavacqua, the new athletic director, a couple months ago, and he said, without giving me the exact numbers, that he felt like between the NBC deal and what Notre Dame gets from its ACC money for its other sports, that Notre Dame is right in the ballpark with the Big Ten and the SEC. So they're above the Big 12 and the ACC. So they're good there at least until 2029. The second thing is, do they have a place to put their basketball teams and their Olympic sports teams? Remember when the Big East blew up? That was a watershed moment for Notre Dame. Where are they going with their other teams? Can they find somebody to take them without demanding football full time? They found that with the ACC. Now, what if the ACC blows up? Is there going to be somebody? So that's something to keep an eye on. That's the ACC's viability as a conference staying together will either force Notre Dame to join somebody full time, or somebody might take them in the same arrangement that they have now. But that's something to look at. The other thing is access to a national championship. And Jack Swarbrick, one of the things besides being Notre Dame's athletic director that he was able to do, he was there. He kept Notre Dame's seat at the table in all these national discussions. And Notre Dame has been able to survive through all these changes in national championship format. And even if and when they go to the 14 team playoff, in that format, they have a guarantee that if they are the number 14 team or higher in the college football playoff standings, they're in. So they have all of the check marks right now, but the shaky one is the ACC. And the media rights thing could have been ugly. I mean, if they couldn't get in that tier with the SEC and the Big Ten, they would have seriously had to look at joining one of those two conferences.
We've heard the bandied about the $22 million, for lack of a better term, salary cap. Are you hearing anything about how Notre Dame will fund that? And is that a threat to non-revenue sports? Obviously, football at Notre Dame, never going to have anything happen to it. Basketball, women's volleyball, women's basketball, those are the sports that tend to generate some revenue. Are they looking, because we're hearing across the country that athletic directors are looking at these non-revenue sports now and saying, I don't know, do we really want to fund coaches and players, et cetera, within this new world?
Yeah. From a standpoint, let's take a look at it from a football standpoint first. And Notre Dame is going to max out on their salary cap per se.
Yeah.
And Marcus Freeman even said, there was a group of us that met him for lunch about a month ago, and he said Notre Dame will pay as well as anybody. So they are competitive in the NIL space. They're competitive in this direct payment space. So how does that impact their Olympic sports and their other sports? Because they're very proud of those. They just won a national championship for the second year in a row in men's lacrosse, for instance. I think they're going to be able to find a way to do that. And again, part of that is because their media rights deal for football makes them so competitive that they don't have to make sacrifices with the other sports. Now, it may get increasingly difficult, but right now there's not that impending panic that I see in a lot of other programs Notre Dame's size, where they're saying, we're going to have to cut some sports to make ends meet. I think it was much worse during the pandemic when there wasn't money coming in. There was a lot of talk about, and I think some teams actually did cut sports during the pandemic. So.
Yeah, especially out of the Pac-12. I mean, Stanford, which was, Olympic U, right?
Yeah.
lot of those programs that don't even exist, west of the Rockies. We're pushed to the wayside. I want to get your thoughts as well on obviously basketball season. We talk a lot of football and NIL and the other space. Right now, it feels like the ACC in basketball is in a downtrend. I mean, it's tough just to get four teams into the NCAA when used to this was a 7, 8, 9 team bid. How does the league look this year? And Coach Shrewsbury here in his second year, what has he got coming back here for the Irish?
Well, he has most of his team coming back. He did have he had a little portal movement out, but he had more portal movement coming in. I mean, he is such a fundamental coach. Early in my career, I covered Bob Knight and Gene Cady, and he, without the pyrotechnics of Bob Knight, he does remind me a lot of the fundamentals and the basics. And he's an Indiana guy, and he grew up in that kind of realm. And I think, defense is where they make their living right now. They need to get more scores. They're doing a pretty good job of selling the program both through the portal and with recruiting, but I think it's a slower process, and the thing is they have the women's program juxtaposed right next to them, who's probably going to be a Final Four team next year. So that puts a little bit more pressure on Micah, but I think he's doing well. The ACC is, Tony is probably the closest of you to my age group. And it just seems unfathomable that we'd ever be having this discussion about the ACC. You remember Phil Ford and the four corners offense and NC State and Monty Tow and David Thompson. But I think some of what the ACC lacks in football in terms of football money, I think bleeds into other sports, including basketball. So I'm not sure where all this is headed with the ACC, but Notre Dame needs to take advantage of it while there's upward movement possible there, because it's very different on the women's side.
When you look at the situation in the ACC, do you see that coming to a head? If that happens sooner, do you see Notre Dame having to really react to it, or do you see them kind of taking a wait and see attitude because they are Notre Dame?
I think they'll take a wait and see attitude. I think they'll have suitors. It's just a matter of what the terms will be. And Pete Pavak was very aware of this, and they're very aware of what could happen and what maybe their options would be. I know when the Big East imploded and they did go to the ACC, I have a very good source that the SEC was interested in them. Now, I'm not sure that they would have taken Notre Dame as a partial member, but they would have liked to have those discussions, and they didn't. And so the fact that there's multiple conferences still, there's fewer of them. But I think they feel like they could, these conferences are so big and the footprints are so big, they could survive in a conference. And certainly during the pandemic, they joined the ACC full time and won the regular season championship. So I think, I was, covering Notre Dame back when the Big Ten took a serious run at them for the first time, when in the end of the Lou Holtz, beginning of the Bob Davie era, and Notre Dame turned them down. But their big concern then was the finite footprint, being a Midwest school. I mean, the Big Ten now goes coast to coast. The ACC goes from the top of the country to the bottom of the country. And so I don't think it's as unpalatable, but they get to control their home kickoff times. There's a lot of freedom with that independence, and they like that aura. They like being independent.
Look, as any business person would tell you, if you can make a lot of money being independent as opposed to being part of a corporation,
Right.
why say no? Eric, we appreciate your time and great insights. Hopefully you're having a great weekend, and we'd like to talk with you again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on, guys.
All right, appreciate it. Thanks so much. Eric Hansen, once again, publisher and columnist for Inside ND Sports, which is a part of the Rivals Network. Great insight there in Notre Dame and what they're thinking in this big world of change in college athletics. We've got more to come after a quick timeout. Stay with us.